Mary, thank you so much for your time. You looked at this report. Why was it commissioned and what has it revealed?
Yeah, good afternoon, Clement. Well, it was in the middle of April that we understand that the City of Johannesburg got wind that there was abuse of the emergency procurement, which had been announced by President Ramaphosa in March already. This audit was specifically focusing on all the purchases made by the city using the emergency procurement mechanism for the state of disaster. And the period in review here is from the 15th of March, which was the day that the President announced the state of disaster, until the 31st of March. So we're looking at a two-week period. What the report shows is that in that two-week period, the city managed to spend 80 million rand on various items related to lockdown and PPE. So we're looking at the masks and sanitizers, which we've heard a lot about from a Gauteng perspective. But here we're looking at, in the city of Joburg, where there were overinflated prices. Those were among the findings. The quality of the products was not up to standard. So you had sanitizer that didn't meet the requirements for to disinfect the 60 or 70% alcohol as is required, and the overcharging, where we had offices which were being disinfected overcharging by R1 million. So those were the key findings, the recommendations among them being that disciplinary steps must be taken against the various officials implicated in this, and mechanisms must be put in place to put an end to the abuse.
Have those mechanisms now been put in place? How has the city responded to this?
The city saying that, firstly, they're very concerned by what had been found. They're saying there are they've chosen it into two aspects, basically. The recommendations that were made, which deal with putting in place mechanisms to stop the abuse, they say that those mechanisms have been done. So the instructions to put in place a committee to look at the procurement, as well as other stops and safe mechanisms to stop the abuse, those are in place, as well as the reporting to the Competition Commission, as well as reporting to Treasury and so on. The aspects which deal with the holding individuals to account, that has not been dealt with. They say that this will be done once they have a full forensic investigation report, which is coming this week. But I did sit down with the city spokesperson, and he had this to say.
Once this report is concluded this week, a team of investigators come in, and we deal with individuals that deliberately flouted the laws. Because as an employee that is employed and in the procurement space, the understanding is that you are qualified and you understand the regulations that guide the processes. But if you deliberately disregard those, it means it's negligence or it's corruption or dereliction of duties. So action must be taken against those individuals.
Barry, what does this say about the supply chain management in Joburg? I mean, how is it possible that these people were able to score these tenders so quickly? We're talking about, what, 2 weeks here?
Well, as the President announced that we are going into the state of disaster, and those 2 weeks immediately thereafter, it was a feeding frenzy. The analogy I like to think of is you can think of racehorses behind the gates, and the moment the gates are open, they are out in a flash, they bolt. And this is what happened within the procurement environment. So how is it possible that a company that deals in engineering in a railway sector was suddenly then in the business of disinfecting offices and were able to move into that sphere and provide the service? Companies that were doing stationery were then selling PPE and these kinds. How did they know about this? Well, it speaks to the patronage networks that are already in place. It speaks to the corruption that is already there. Now, I spoke to a governance expert on this particular aspect. So what can we draw from this report? What does it tell us? He had this to say.
It tells us a lot about supply chain management and how it's practiced in the public sector or not practiced in the public sector, in that the guidelines, the rules, the Treasury notes are clear. It's got to follow clear practices and processes. And there were special processes announced for this PPE requisition. And those were basically thrown out the window. You had people getting contracts who weren't registered on the central supplier database. You had people that were getting contracts where their quotes were way above the minimum threshold set by the procurement standing orders. And that tells us that there's collusion between outside actors and inside managers of the processes of procurement. And that collusion runs deep in terms of the way information is shared. So you've got insider trading, and you've got very, very influential people who are making decisions on contracts going in certain directions. So in short, it's rotten to the core.
Let's talk about consequence management here, Barry. The City of Joburg can do its part, but are we going to see these people facing criminal charges?
Yeah, the exact question that I was putting to the city as well. I've all touched on that as well as one of the questions. How can we deal with this? Well, the only way we're going to be able to deal with this is if you refer to their consequences. The people who are involved in this must be held accountable, whether that's internally or they will be criminally prosecuted, and to the fullest might of the law. The city's saying that they will take that action if it is necessary, but it all hinges on the arrival of that final forensic report, which we will certainly go back to the city and ask about.
All right. Barry Bateman, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.